The rain was a thief. It stole the warmth from my bones, the integrity from the cardboard I'd taped over the crack in my window, and the last shred of hope from my heart. It hammered against the flimsy glass of our second-floor apartment, a frantic, angry drumming that echoed the frantic, angry thumping in my chest. I stared at the empty biscuit tin on the kitchen counter, its cheerful floral pattern, a mocking parody of the emptiness inside me. The money was gone, all of it. The $562 I had painstakingly scraped together over 3 months of double shifts, spilled coffee, and aching feet. Rent money, Leo's asthma medication money, our everything money. And Mark, my feckless, charming black hole of a man ex, had taken it. A racking cough echoed from the other room, small and strained. Leo, my son, my world. The dampness in the air was his enemy, a creeping miasma that tightened its grip on his little lungs. I rushed to his bedside, my bare feet cold, against the peeling linoleum. He was curled into a tight ball under a threadbare blanket, his small face pale in the gloom, his breaths coming in shallow, wheezing puffs. His inhaler was on the nightstand, and I knew before I even picked it up that it was empty. The little rattle it made was hollow, a sound of utter finality. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of despair. I had the prescription refill slip, but the pharmacy wouldn't give it to me for free. I had exactly $7.41 in my purse. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The eviction notice taped to the inside of our front door seemed to glow with a malevolent light, its stark red letters a promise of the street that awaited us. I felt a scream building in my throat, a raw, primal sound of a cornered animal. I choked it down, my nails digging into my palms. I couldn't fall apart. Leo needed me. I had to do something. Anything. My mind raced, sifting through the barren landscape of my dinnerable options. I could call my manager at the diner, but he'd already advanced me what he could last month. My parents were gone, and the few friends I had were just as broke as I was. There was only one person left, one name I had sworn I would never call again. Mark. He had to have some of the money left. He couldn't have gambled it all away in just a few hours. The thought was a bitter pill, but desperation was a powerful acid, dissolving pride and promises with terrifying ease. I found my cheap smartphone, its screen a spiderweb of cracks. My hands trembled as I typed out the message, my thumbs fumbling on the tiny keyboard. Mark, you bastard. You took the rent. Leo can't breathe. I need money for his inhaler now. Don't you care? The words were ugly, pathetic, a beggar's plea. I hated myself for sending them. I hated him for making me. I hit send, the little whoosh of the message disappearing into the ether, feeling like the final exhalation of my self-respect. I waited, staring at the screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 1 minute, 2, 5, nothing. Of course. He was probably in some smoky back room, throwing our future away on a hand of cards, his phone silenced. A fresh wave of coughing from Leo's room spurred me into action. I couldn't wait. I grabbed my worn coat, the $7, and the prescription slip. I'd go to the pharmacy. I'd beg. I'd offer to wash their floors, scrub their toilets, anything. I tucked the blanket more tightly around Leo, kissing his damp forehead. "I'll be right back, sweetie," I whispered, my voice thick. "Mama will be right back." The world outside was a churning vortex of wind and water. The rain was coming down in solid, blinding sheets, turning the already grimy streets of my neighborhood into dark, reflective rivers of filth. My umbrella, a cheap thing I'd found on a bus, inverted almost immediately, its flimsy metal spokes groaning in protest before snapping. I swore under my breath and tossed it into an overflowing bin, pulling the thin hood of my coat over my head. It was useless. Within seconds, my hair was plastered to my scalp, and cold water was trickling down my back. The pharmacy was 6 blocks away, a journey that felt like a polar expedition. Every step was a battle against the wind. The streetlights cast a sickly yellow haze on the slick pavement, the world blurred and distorted by the relentless downpour. I finally stumbled through the automatic doors of the 24-hour pharmacy, a shivering, dripping mess. The pharmacist, A tired-looking man with weary eyes looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. I explained my situation, my voice cracking, the words tumbling out in a desperate torrent. I showed him my $7. I offered to work. He just shook his head slowly, his expression hardening into professional regret. "I'm sorry, miss. I can't. It's policy." I walked back out into the storm, defeated. The prescription slip was a sodden, useless piece of paper in my hand. Tears mixed with the rain on my face, hot and salty. I was failing. I was failing my son. I was at the absolute end of my rope, the frayed ends slipping through my fingers. As I rounded the corner onto my own street, my gaze fixed on the dim light of my apartment window, a beacon of my failure, I saw him. He was just a little boy, no older than Leo, standing stock still in the middle of the sidewalk. He was drenched, his dark hair slicked to his head, but it was his clothes that made me stop. He wore a perfectly tailored little peacoat, dark wool that must have cost more than my entire wardrobe, and tiny, polished leather shoes that were now soaked through. He wasn't crying, but his face was a mask of stark terror, his big, dark eyes wide and lost. He was a miniature ship of priceless porcelain, adrift and about to be shattered in the grimy, violent sea of my neighborhood. My own problems evaporated. All I saw was a child, alone and scared. I moved toward him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Hey there," I said, my voice softer than I thought possible. "Are you lost?" He flinched, his small body tensing. He looked up at me, his bottom lip trembling. He didn't speak, just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "It's okay," I said, kneeling so I was at his level. The cold concrete seeped through the knees of my jeans instantly. "It's too wet out here. See that place with the lights on? That's a diner. We can go in there and get you warm. And maybe some hot chocolate? My name is Alara." He hesitated for a long moment, his dark eyes searching mine. I don't know what he saw there, maybe the reflection of his own fear, or maybe the raw, scraped clean honesty of a woman with nothing left to lose. He gave another tiny nod and slipped his small, cold hand into mine. His trust was a physical weight, a sudden and profound responsibility. I led him across the street to the greasy spoon where I worked, its familiar sign a beacon of warmth, if not hope. The bell over the door chimed as we entered, and a wave of warm, greasy air washed over us, smelling of stale coffee and fried onions. It had never smelled so good. I sat him in a booth, the red vinyl cracked and peeling, and shrugged off my soaked coat. He just sat there, shivering, a tiny, silent statue. I flagged down Brenda, the night shift waitress, and ordered a hot chocolate for him, putting it on my tab. When it came, I pushed the steaming mug toward him. "Here, this will help." He wrapped his small hands around the warm ceramic, his knuckles white. He still hadn't said a word. "What's your name?" I asked gently. He looked down at the mug. "Adrian," he whispered, his voice so quiet I barely heard it over the hiss of the grill. "Adrian," I repeated. "That's a nice name. My son is named Leo." I tried to smile, but it felt brittle. "Do you know your mommy or daddy's phone number? We need to call them. They must be worried sick." He shook his head, his eyes welling up with tears he refused to let fall. He reached into the pocket of his little coat and pulled out a small, stiff card. It was made of thick, creamy paper, incredibly elegant. In the center, embossed in stark black ink, was a single phone number. No name, no address, just the number. It felt strange, cold, and impersonal, but it was my only lead. "Is this for your dad?" I asked. He nodded. My phone was damp, but it flickered to life. My heart was starting to pound again, a different kind of anxiety now. This was all so strange. The expensive coat, the silent child, the minimalist card. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. It rang once, a short, clipped sound, before someone answered. There was no greeting, just a wall of silence. "Hello," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "Hello. I think I have your son." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a beat, heavy and charged. Then a voice spoke, and the sound of it sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. It was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a voice like aged whiskey and polished steel, smooth but with a deadly sharp edge. "Where are you?" There was no panic in his tone, no frantic relief of a worried father. It was a command, a demand for information, delivered with the absolute certainty that it would be obeyed. "We're at a diner," I stammered, intimidated. "The corner griddle on 6th and Miller." Another pause. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of the rain against a window pane on his end. "The lights are flickering in the front sign," the voice stated, not asked. "The G is out." A cold dread washed over me. I twisted in the booth to look out the window. From this angle, I couldn't see the sign. How could he possibly know that? How? Did you know that? "Stay where you are," the voice commanded, ignoring my question. "Do not leave the diner. Do not let him out of your sight. Do not speak to anyone else. I am 5 minutes away." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hand trembling. This wasn't a normal worried father. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. I looked at Adrian, who was finally sipping his hot chocolate, a little ring of foam on his upper lip. He looked so small, so innocent. What kind of world did this child belong to? The unease in my stomach had curdled into full-blown fear. I had a sudden, desperate urge to grab him and run, to disappear back into the rainy night. But the man's voice, the sheer, implacable authority in it, held me rooted to the spot. "I am 5 minutes away." It had sounded less like a statement of fact and more like a pronouncement of doom. The next 4 minutes were the longest of my life. The diner, usually a place of comforting, mundane noise, seemed unnaturally quiet. The clatter of plates in the kitchen sounded like gunshots. Brenda shot me a questioning look from behind the counter, but I just shook my head, unable to form words. I watched the street, my eyes scanning the rain-slicked asphalt for... what? I didn't know. Then I saw them. A pair of headlights cut through the deluge. Then another, and another. They weren't the scattered, random lights of city traffic. They were organized, moving in formation. A procession of identical, gleaming black SUVs, their dark-tinted windows like the eyes of predatory insects, turned onto our street. They moved with a silent, menacing grace, water parting before their massive tires. One by one, they pulled up in front of the diner, boxing in the entire block. Their engines idled with a low, threatening rumble that vibrated through the floor. The few other patrons in the diner froze, their forks halfway to their mouths, their faces pale with shock and fear. This wasn't a rescue. It was an invasion. The door of the lead vehicle opened, and a man stepped out into the rain. He didn't have an umbrella, didn't seem to notice the downpour at all. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to repel the water. His dark hair was cut short, severe. As he strode toward the diner, another man, equally large but dressed more practically in a black, tactical-looking jacket, fell into step behind him. The bell over the diner door chimed, a sound that now seemed impossibly fragile. The man stepped inside, and the entire atmosphere of the place changed. The air grew thick, heavy with power and an almost tangible sense of danger. He was the man from the phone. I knew it instantly. His presence was overwhelming, a magnetic field that drew all focus to him. His eyes, the same dark, intense shade as his son's, swept the room once, dismissing everything, before they landed on our booth, on me, and on Adrian. His horror expression softened for a fraction of a second when he saw his son, a flicker of raw relief that was almost immediately suppressed. He walked toward us, his expensive shoes making no sound on the grimy floor. He stopped at our table, looming over me. He was even bigger up close, a mountain of dark-suited muscle and authority. "Adrian," he said, his voice the same deep, controlled rumble from the phone. The little boy scrambled out of the booth and ran to his father, burying his face in the man's trousers. The man placed a hand on his son's head, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Then his gaze lifted and settled on me. It was an unnerving look, analytical and intense, as if he were cataloging every detail of my worn-out jeans, my damp, frayed sweater, the exhaustion etched onto my face. "You are Ilara," he stated. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes." I am Julian Valerius, he said, the name meaning nothing to me, yet it sounded like it should. I thank you for finding my son. His words were polite, but his tone was clipped, formal. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick wallet. He extracted a wad of cash that would have solved all my problems for a year and dropped it on the table. For your trouble. The money landed next to the half-empty mug of hot chocolate. It was a dismissal, a payment for services rendered. My pride, which I thought had been completely eroded, flared to life. I had comforted a terrified child, not performed a transaction. I don't want your money, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I pushed the stack of bills back toward him. Julian Valerius stilled. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of surprise in their dark depths. He looked from the money back to my face, and his expression shifted. The cold analysis was replaced by something else, a flicker of genuine curiosity. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. His eyes dropped to the pharmacy bag on the seat beside me, the logo clearly visible. Your son is ill, he said, another statement of fact. His asthma is acting up, I admitted, my defiance wavering. I didn't want to show this man any weakness. And you were unable to acquire his medication. My face burned. He saw everything. He saw my poverty, my desperation. I didn't answer, just clutched my hands together in my lap. He turned his head slightly. Roman, he said to the large man standing silently behind him. Take Adrian to the car. Yes, Mr. Valerius. The man, Roman, gently guided the little boy toward the door. Adrian looked back at me once, his expression unreadable, before disappearing into the night. Now it was just me and Julian Valerius in the hushed diner. His focus was entirely on me, and it was suffocating. You and your son will come with me, he said. It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the same quiet, finality as his phone call. No, I said, panic flaring again. No, thank you. My apartment is just across the street. We'll be fine. Your apartment has a broken window covered with cardboard. Your landlord has filed an eviction notice. And your ex-boyfriend, Mark Renshaw, is a gambling addict who stole your rent money less than 3 hours ago, he said, his voice level, matter of fact. You will not be fine. You will be on the street by morning. Now, you will come with me. The world tilted. He knew everything. In the few minutes since my call, this man had somehow peeled back the layers of my life and exposed every raw, humiliating secret. The fear I felt was no longer vague. It was specific and sharp. This man was not just powerful. His power was of a kind I couldn't begin to comprehend. How? I whispered, the question dying on my lips. He didn't answer. He simply gestured toward the door, his expression unyielding. Your son is waiting. We do not have all night. My mind was a maelstrom of terror and confusion. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where could I go? He knew everything. He could find me. And what choice did I really have? Go with this terrifying, omniscient stranger, or go back to my cold apartment and wait for my son's breathing to worsen, with no hope of helping him? It wasn't a choice at all. It was a surrender. Numbly, I stood up. I left his money on the table. With my head held high, though my insides were trembling, I walked out of the diner and into his world. Roman was waiting by the open door of one of the SUVs. He nodded at me curtly and gestured for me to get my son. I felt like a prisoner being escorted. I ran across the street, the rain plastering my clothes to my skin once more, and up the rickety stairs to my apartment. I bundled a sleepy, confused Leo into his coat, grabbing the empty inhaler and the prescription slip out of habit. I didn't take anything else. What was the point? When I carried Leo back down, Julian was waiting on the sidewalk, shielded from the rain by the massive form of Roman holding an enormous black umbrella. He looked at the small, coughing bundle in my arms, and for a fleeting instant, I saw that same flicker of something protective in his eyes. He didn't speak, just led the way to the lead SUV. The door was opened for us, and I slid onto the buttery soft leather of the back seat, clutching Leo tightly. The interior of the car was another world. It was silent, insulated from the storm raging outside. It smelled of leather and something else, a clean, masculine scent that was just him. Julian slid in beside me, the space suddenly feeling very small. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing us inside. It felt like the closing of a vault door, or a cage. The convoy of SUVs pulled away from the curb with a smooth, synchronized surge of power, leaving my life, my neighborhood, and all my pathetic, insoluble problems behind in the rain. I held my sleeping son and stared out the tinted window at the blurred, passing lights of a city I no longer felt a part of, my heart hammering with a terrifying mix of dread and a tiny, shameful spark of relief. I was being taken, kidnapped, for all intents and purposes. But for the first time all night, Leo's coughing had subsided in the warm, dry air of the car, and he was breathing easier. And a traitorous part of my brain couldn't help but whisper that maybe, just maybe, this was a rescue after all. The journey was silent and surreal. I expected to be driven across town, to some high-rise penthouse gleaming with chrome and glass. Instead, we left the city lights behind, heading into the dark, wooded hills that bordered the metropolis. The rain finally eased to a persistent drizzle, and through the window, I saw glimpses of sprawling properties hidden behind high stone walls and iron gates. We eventually turned onto a private road marked by 2 imposing stone pillars, but no name. The road wound through a dense forest for what felt like miles, until finally, a house came into view. House was the wrong word. It was a fortress. A modern-day castle built of dark stone and vast panes of glass. It sprawled across the crest of a hill, overlooking the distant, glittering lights of the city. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, a monument to wealth and power so immense it was beyond my comprehension. The convoy swept up a long, circular driveway and came to a halt before a massive front door. Roman opened my door, and I stepped out, clutching Leo, who was still fast asleep. The air here was different, clean, crisp, smelling of wet earth and pine. Julian came to stand beside me, his presence a solid wall of heat in the cool night. He looked at my face, then at the imposing structure before us. "Welcome to my home," he said, his voice flat. It didn't sound like a welcome. It sounded like a declaration of ownership. Inside, the scale of the place was even more staggering. The foyer was a cavern of white marble, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. A grand, sweeping staircase dominated one wall, and a single, enormous, abstract painting, a violent slash of red on a black canvas, hung on another. There were no family photos, no clutter, no signs of a life being lived. It was as beautiful and as sterile as a museum. Staff, all dressed in simple gray uniforms, appeared as if from nowhere, their faces impassive. "Prepare the East Wing suite," Julian commanded to a woman who looked like a head housekeeper. 2 bedrooms, and have Dr. Allister come to the house immediately. Have him bring a full pediatric asthma kit. He turned back to me. "A doctor will see to your son." He then looked down at my soaked clothes and bare feet. "Amelia will show you to your rooms and provide you with anything you need." The housekeeper, Amelia, gave a slight bow of her head. "This way, miss." I followed her numbly up the grand staircase, my wet jeans leaving dark prints on the pristine white marble. I felt like a piece of street trash someone had accidentally dragged inside. The suite she led me to was larger than my entire apartment. It had a sitting room with a fireplace, 2 opulent bedrooms, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel, all marble and chrome fixtures. In one of the bedrooms, a king-sized bed was already turned down, and in the other, a smaller bed was being prepared for Leo. "Dry clothes will be brought for you shortly, miss," Amelia said, her voice polite but distant. "Is there anything else you require?" My life back. I wanted to scream. I want to go home. But home was an empty apartment and an eviction notice. I just shook my head, and she departed as silently as she had arrived. I gently laid Leo on the large bed. He murmured in his sleep but didn't wake. I stood there, dripping on a rug that probably cost more than I made in a year, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. It was like I had fallen through a crack in the world and landed in a place where the rules of my reality no longer applied. A short while later, a quiet knock came at the door. It wasn't Amelia, but a young maid carrying a pile of clothes. They were simple: a soft cashmere sweater, comfortable-looking trousers, thick wool socks. They were also, I noticed with a jolt, exactly my size. He had guessed, or he had known. I didn't know which was more disturbing. After I changed, another knock announced the arrival of the doctor, an older, kind-faced man who introduced himself as Dr. Alistair. He was calm and professional, and his presence was a small island of normalcy in this sea of strangeness. He examined a still-sleeping Leo, his touch gentle. "His lungs are irritated, but it's not a severe attack," he said, his voice reassuring. "The warm, dry air is already helping. I have a nebulizer, the treatment for him, and here are several new inhalers. This should keep him comfortable." He smiled at me. Mr. Valerius is very thorough when it comes to health. After the doctor left, I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of Leo's chest. He was safe. He could breathe. The knot of panic that had been lodged in my throat for hours finally began to loosen. For all the terror and confusion, Julian Valerius had done in an hour what I had failed to do all day. He had provided. The relief was so profound it made me feel weak. And that weakness scared me more than anything. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, a soft knock came from the main door of the suite. I padded across the thick carpet and opened it. Julian stood there. He had changed out of his suit into a simple black sweater and dark trousers. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a predator at rest. "May I come in?" he asked, the first real question he'd posed to me. I hesitated, then stepped back, allowing him to enter the sitting room. He walked over to the large window that overlooked the city, his hands clasped behind his back. "The doctor is satisfied with your son's condition," he said, his back still to me. "Yes, thank you." The words felt inadequate. He turned around, his dark eyes fixing on me. "I had my security chief, Roman, conduct a background check on you after your call." My stomach clenched. "You already made that clear." "I did," he acknowledged. "Alara Vance, 26 years old, employed as a waitress at the corner griddle. One son, Leo, age 5. No living family. Your ex-partner, Mark Renshaw, has multiple outstanding debts to several unofficial lenders. He is a degenerate gambler who has stolen from you on at least 4 prior occasions." He recited the bleak facts of my life as if reading a grocery list. Each word was a small, sharp humiliation. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took a step closer. The sheer force of his personality was like a physical pressure. "I want to make you an offer. Your situation is untenable. You have no money, no home, and a sick child. You are vulnerable, and your kindness to my son tonight, despite your own desperation, has placed you on my radar." "On your radar?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "What does that even mean?" "It means I am aware of you," he said, his tone chillingly simple. "And I do not leave debts unpaid, nor do I tolerate loose ends." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Here is my offer. I will settle all of your outstanding debts. I will ensure you have a permanent, secure home, far from here. I will establish a trust to provide for all of Leo's medical needs and his education for the rest of his life. Your financial problems will cease to exist, permanently." I stared at him, speechless. It was an impossible dream, a fairy tale solution to a lifetime of struggle. There had to be a catch, a terrible, horrifying catch. "Why?" I finally managed to ask. "Why would you do all that for a stranger?" "As I said, I repay my debts. You protected what is most valuable to me in this world. The cost of your problems is insignificant to me." "And what's the catch?" I pressed, my heart hammering. "What do you want in return?" His gaze was unwavering. "There are conditions, of course. For the immediate future, you and your son will remain here, in this house, under my protection. You will not leave the grounds without my permission and my security. You will sever all contact with your former life, including and especially Mark Renshaw. He will be dealt with." The blood drained from my face. "Dealt with? What are you going to do to him?" "That does not concern you," he said dismissively. "All you need to know is that he will never bother you again. These conditions are for your safety. My son was targeted tonight. It was not a random wandering. He was taken from my security detail, and a professional crew was meant to collect him. You stumbling upon him was an anomaly that disrupted their plan. My breath hitched, targeted, taken. This was so much bigger and more dangerous than I could have imagined. Adrian wasn't just lost. He was bait. Who? I breathed. Who took him? Rivals, he said, his voice turning to ice. And now that you have involved yourself, however accidentally, they will see you. They will see you as a weakness, a way to get to me. Out there, he gestured vaguely toward the window and the city beyond. You are a liability, a target. In here, he swept his hand to encompass the room, the house. You are protected. It was a gilded cage. He was offering me a golden prison, locking me away for my own good. He was solving my problems by taking over my entire life. I thought of Leo, sleeping, peacefully in the next room, breathing easy for the first time in days. I thought of the eviction notice, the empty biscuit tin, the soul-crushing despair of that afternoon. What real freedom did I have to lose? My freedom to be poor, scared, and helpless. Why do you care so much? I asked. A different question this time, a more personal one. About protecting people? Julian was silent for a long time. He walked over to the unlit fireplace, resting one hand on the marble mantelpiece. The carefully constructed mask of command seemed to slip for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of something raw and wounded beneath. When I was 10, he began, his voice low and gravelly, stripped of its usual authority. My father was in a similar line of work to my own. He had many enemies. They saw my mother as his primary weakness. She wasn't involved in his business. She was a painter. She loved gardens. She was gentle, kind, much like you were to my son tonight. He paused, and the silence was filled with a profound, ancient grief. They didn't come for my father, he continued, his voice tight. They came for her. They took her, thinking they could use her as leverage. But my father was not a man who negotiated. He retaliated, violently. By the time he got to her, it was too late. He turned his head and looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the reflection of a 10-year-old boy who had lost everything. She died because he couldn't protect her, because his enemies knew she was the one thing he loved without condition. I will not make the same mistake. Adrian is my world, and anyone who touches my world, or shows kindness within it, falls under my protection, whether they ask for it or not. The story settled over me like a shroud. It wasn't a justification. It was a confession. It was the key that unlocked the puzzle of Julian Valerius. His possessiveness, his paranoia, his overwhelming need for control, it all stemmed from that one devastating loss. He wasn't just protecting me from his rivals. He was protecting himself from a history he was desperate not to repeat. He saw his mother in me, another innocent woman drawn into his dangerous orbit. And in that moment, my fear of him began to change. It didn't disappear, but it became intertwined with something else. A startling, unwelcome surge of empathy. I saw past the cold, dangerous mafia boss and saw the wounded man beneath. You have until morning to decide, he said, his mask of command sliding back into place. But know this, Elara, there is only one correct choice. He turned and left the suite, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone with his impossible offer and the ghost of his mother. I walked to the window and looked out at the glittering expanse of the city below. It looked like a different planet, a world I no longer belonged to. He was right. I was already in his cage. The only choice was whether to accept the gold plating. I looked back toward the bedroom where my son was sleeping, safe and sound, and I knew, with a sinking heart, that my choice had already been made. The next morning, I woke to the soft, pale light of dawn filtering through the massive windows. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. The sheer opulence of the room, the weight of the silken duvet, the profound quiet it was all alien. Then the memory of the previous night crashed down on me. The rain, the lost boy, the fleet of black cars, and the terrifying, magnetic man who had taken over my life. I slid out of bed and crept into Leo's room. He was still asleep, his face relaxed, his breathing even and clear. A new inhaler sat on the bedside table, next to a glass of water. A a silent testament to Julian's promise. I found fresh clothes laid out for both me and Leo. Designer jeans, soft sweaters, new shoes. It was a uniform for our new life. When Leo woke up, he was initially confused by the strange, grand room, but his 5-year-old mind quickly adapted, his eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. "Are we in a castle, Mama?" he asked, bouncing on the plush carpet. "Something like that, sweetie," I said, my voice strained. Amelia arrived to inform us that breakfast was served, and that Adrian was eager to see Leo. The two boys met in a vast, sun-drenched playroom that was better equipped than any daycare center I had ever seen. They hit it off immediately, their shared shyness giving way to the universal language of toys and laughter. Watching them play together, two little boys from impossibly different worlds, a strange sense of peace settled over me. For the first time in a long time, Leo looked simply like a happy child, not a sick one I constantly worried over. Julian found me there, watching them. He stood in the doorway, silent for a moment. He was dressed in another impeccable suit, ready for a day of running his unseen empire. "You've made your decision," he said. It wasn't a question. I turned to face him, my resolve hardening. "I accept your conditions." My voice was clear, steady. "I will stay. For Leo's safety." A flicker of something satisfaction. Perhaps relief crossed his face before it was shuttered away. "A wise choice." He stepped into the room. "Roman is already taking care of the matter with Mark Renshaw. Your stolen money will be returned to you by noon, along with a signed document from him, relinquishing all contact. You will never hear from him again." The casual way he said it, the absolute certainty, was chilling. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know what methods Roman would use to secure a man's signature and disappearance. I just nodded, accepting this dark miracle as part of the package. "There is another matter," he continued, his tone becoming graver. "The men who were after Adrian, my rivals, the Petrov family. The name sounded Slavic, brutal. They are aware of your existence. One of their cars was spotted this morning near your old apartment building." He handed me a tablet. On the screen was a grainy, long-lens photograph of a black sedan parked across the street from my building. Two grim-faced men sat inside, their eyes fixed on the entrance. My blood ran cold. That could have been me and Leo walking out that door. "They are looking for you," Julian said, his voice a low growl. "They think you are my woman, my leverage." "But I'm not," I whispered, horrified. "To them, the distinction is irrelevant," he said, taking the tablet back. "You were the last person seen with my son before he was returned. You are now in my house. In their world, that makes you mine." The word hung in the air between us, possessive and absolute. Mine. "This is why you cannot leave. This house is the safest place for you and your son. It is a fortress. My men are the best. No one can get to you here." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt like chains tightening around me. The gilded cage was no longer just a metaphor for my dependence on him. It was a physical necessity. The abstract danger had become a real and present threat, with faces and a black sedan. He wasn't just being a possessive protector fueled by his past trauma. He was being practical. My fear of his world was suddenly eclipsed by my fear of what was outside it. He had, with a single photograph, made me a willing prisoner. "What will you do?" I asked, my voice hushed. "I will handle it," he said, his jaw tight. "I will eliminate the threat, but it will take a day or two to put the pieces in place. Until then, the estate is on lockdown. No one in or out without my express command." He looked from me to the two boys playing, oblivious on the floor. "Your only job is to stay inside, and to keep him safe." He nodded toward Leo. The day passed in a surreal haze. I felt like an actress in a play I hadn't rehearsed. I ate exquisite food I hadn't cooked. In a dining room that could have seated 40. I wandered through silent, art-filled hallways, always under the distant, watchful eye of a staff member or a security guard. It was a life of absolute luxury and zero freedom. True to his word, Roman appeared just before noon. He was as stoic and intimidating as ever. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was my $562, crisp and clean, and underneath it was a single sheet of paper. It was a legal document, hastily drawn up, in which Mark Renshaw formally declared he had no desire for any future contact with me or Leo, signed in his familiar, sloppy scrawl. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He accepted a generous relocation package," Roman said, his face impassive. "He is on a flight to Bangkok. He was advised that returning to this continent would be detrimental to his health." And that was it. A man who had been a toxic, recurring storm in my something. Life for years was gone. Erased. Julian Valerius had waved his hand and made my biggest personal problem disappear. It was terrifyingly efficient. I felt a dizzying mix of relief and guilt. I should have been horrified by the blatant display of extra-legal power. But mostly, I was just grateful. Mark was gone. The constant anxiety, the stolen money, the broken promises, all of it, gone. The price was my freedom. But as I tucked the money away, money that now seemed laughably insignificant, I wasn't sure I regretted the trade. The next 24 hours were tense. The atmosphere in the house, already formal, became taut with a coiled energy. I saw more security personnel, their faces grim, speaking in low voices into earpieces. I saw Julian in a vast, modern office that looked like a military command center, surrounded by maps and screens, Roman at his side. He was a general preparing for war. He barely seemed to eat or sleep. Whenever our paths crossed in the long hallways, his eyes would find mine, and for a moment, the commander would disappear, replaced by a man carrying an immense weight. He would ask if Leo and I were comfortable, if we needed anything, his concern for us a strange, soft counterpoint to the impending violence he was orchestrating. The night of the second day, he found me in the library. I couldn't sleep. I was surrounded by thousands of leather-bound books, the air thick with the scent of old paper and wood polish. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. There were dark circles under his eyes, but his gaze was as intense as ever. "It's done," he said, his voice weary. "Done? The Petrov situation. It has been resolved." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. I knew what resolved meant in his world. It meant the men in the black sedan were no longer a threat. It meant a rival organization had been dismantled, likely with brutal finality. I might read about it in a small article on the back page of the newspaper in a day or two. A warehouse fire. A series of gang-related accidents. The thought should have terrified me. But the overwhelming emotion I felt was relief. The external threat was gone. The cage doors were, theoretically, open. He walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to me. I took it, my fingers brushing against his. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between us. "You've been through a great deal," he said, his voice softer now, the commander replaced by the man. "I did not intend for you to be drawn into this." "You gave me no choice," I said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. "No," he admitted, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "I didn't." He took a sip, his eyes never leaving mine. "When I received your call, when I heard Adrian was with a stranger, for the first time since my mother's death, I felt true fear. Not for myself, for him. My entire world narrowed down to that single point of terror." He took a step closer, and my breath caught in my throat. "And then I found him," he continued, his voice a low murmur. "Safe, warm, with you. You were drenched, exhausted, clearly in your own world of trouble, but you stopped for a lost child. You showed him a kindness and a decency that I thought had been burned out of the world long ago." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was electric, a searing heat against my skin. All the fear, all the resentment, all the confusion of the past 2 days seemed to melt away under that simple, tender gesture. "In my world," he whispered, his thumb now stroking my cheekbone, "there is very little light. You were a light in that diner, Ilara. A beacon." My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. The space between us was charged, thick, with unspoken things. I looked into his eyes and saw not the ruthless crime lord, but the lonely man, the grieving son, the fiercely protective father. I saw the vulnerability he kept hidden from the world, A vulnerability he was, for some reason, showing only to me. I didn't pull away. I didn't even breathe. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. His eyes darkened, and he lowered his head, his gaze dropping to my lips, and then he kissed me. It wasn't a brutal, possessive kiss, as I might have expected from a man like him. It was tentative at first, questioning. It was a kiss of profound relief, of shared exhaustion, of a connection forged in chaos. It was the taste of whiskey and danger and a safety I was only just beginning to understand. I responded instinctively, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart under my palm. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more demanding, and I met it with a hunger I hadn't realized, possessed. It was a kiss that sealed a pact, an acknowledgement of the invisible lines that had been drawing us together since the moment I'd answered his call. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "Alara," he breathed, my name a prayer on his lips. In that moment, in the quiet of the library, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the violence of his present, I was no longer his prisoner. I was something else, something more, and it was a feeling that scared me and thrilled me in equal measure. The next morning, the tension in the house was gone. The extra security had vanished, and the staff's faces were relaxed. The war was over. I found Julian on a wide stone terrace, nursing a cup of coffee and looking out at the sprawling grounds. The sun was bright, the air was clean. It felt like the first day of a new world. He turned as I approached, and his expression was different. The guarded, severe look was gone, replaced by a quiet warmth that was centered entirely on me. "Good morning," he said, and his voice was just a man's voice, deep and pleasant. "Good morning," I replied, my cheeks heating as I remembered our kiss. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching our sons chase each other across a vast, perfectly manicured lawn below. They were laughing, their joy echoing in the quiet morning air. They already looked like brothers. "The threat is gone," Julian said, turning to face me fully. "The Petrovs are no longer a concern, and Mark Renshaw is on the other side of the world. You are safe now, truly safe." I nodded, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. I knew what was coming next. "You are free to go," he said, his voice even, though I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. "I meant what I said. I will provide for you. I'll buy you a house in any city you choose. The trust for Leo is already being established. You can walk out of here, today, and never see me again. You have my word." He was giving me the choice he had denied me before. The cage door was wide open. I could take my son, take the blood money, and build a new life, a normal life, far away from him and his darkness. It was everything I should have wanted. A week ago, it would have been an impossible fantasy come true. I looked down at Leo, his face bright with happiness, his breathing easy and free. I looked at Adrian, who followed Leo everywhere, his silent adoration obvious. They had found in each other a companionship neither had ever known. Then I looked at Julian. I saw the man who had brought a doctor in the middle of the night. The man who had ruthlessly eliminated every threat to my peace and safety. The man who had looked at me like I was a beacon of light in his dark world. The man who had kissed me with a tenderness that belied his violent nature. A normal life. What was that, really? Going back to scrimping and saving, to worrying about bills, to being alone? This life was not normal. It was dangerous and complicated, and built on a foundation of things I didn't want to examine too closely. But here, in this fortress with this man, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt safe. And more than that, I felt seen. "I don't want to go," I said, the words quiet but firm. Julian stilled, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He searched my face, looking for any sign of coercion or fear. He found none, just the simple, terrifying truth. "You would choose to stay?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Here? With me? Knowing what I am?" "I know you're a man who protects his family," I said. "I know you're a father who loves his son more than anything. I know you showed me kindness when all I expected was a transaction." I took a breath. "And my son is happy here, He's healthy, and I hesitated, then forced myself to say it. I am happy here. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, breathtaking smile that transformed his severe features. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. The relief in his eyes was so profound it was almost painful to witness. I had hoped, he said, his voice thick with emotion, but I would not have forced you. He set his cup down and stepped toward me, taking both of my hands in his. His grip was warm and strong. If you stay, Alara, you stay as my partner, as my equal. This house will be your home. My world will be your world, the good and the bad. I know, I said, and I did. I was walking into this with my eyes wide open. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart leaped into my throat. It was too soon for that, but when he opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a locket, an antique, made of heavy, burnished gold, hanging from a delicate chain. It was ornate and beautiful, clearly an heirloom. He opened the clasp. This was my mother's, he said softly, his voice filled with reverence. She wore it every day. My father gave it to her when they were married. It was the only thing of hers I managed to save. He turned it over. On the back, an inscription was barely visible. Lusmia, my light. My eyes filled with tears. The weight of the gesture, the history, and the trust it represented was immense. He was giving me the most precious piece of his past, a symbol of the woman he had lost and was so desperate to protect. Julian, I whispered, overwhelmed. He didn't say anything. He simply unclasped the chain and fastened it around my neck. The cool, heavy gold settled against my skin, a tangible promise. It felt like an anchor, grounding me in this new reality. He lifted it, his fingers brushing my collarbone, and looked from the locket to my eyes. Lusmia, he whispered. He was no longer just protecting a stranger he felt indebted to. He was protecting his light. I stood on that sun-drenched terrace, a priceless heirloom around my neck, my hand in the hand of one of the most dangerous men in the city, and I felt no fear. Below us, our son's laughter was the only sound that mattered. I thought of the desperate, rain-soaked woman I had been just a few days ago, sending that hopeless, angry message into the void. It felt like a lifetime ago. A different person. That woman was gone, washed away by the storm. Julian's hand tightened on mine, and he drew me closer, his arm wrapping around my waist. I leaned against him, resting my head on his shoulder. It felt right. It felt like coming home. The future was an unknown territory, filled with shadows and dangers I could only guess at. But for the first time in my life, I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. I had walked through the rain and stumbled into a fortress, and its king had just handed me the keys to his kingdom, and to his heart. Looking out at the sunlit lawn, at the family we were accidentally, miraculously becoming, I knew that my choice was made. I was staying. I was home.